6 months earlier, I thought I had found paradise. After my divorce was finalized and the dust settled on the worst year of my life, I needed a fresh start for Tommy and me. Willowbrook Estates looked like something out of a magazine, with its tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, and pristine sidewalks that seemed to gleam in the morning sun. The real estate agent, Sarah, walked us through the neighborhood on a perfect Saturday morning. Tommy ran ahead of us, his 8-year-old energy impossible to contain as he pointed at every house, every tree, every detail that caught his imagination. The backyard of our potential new home stretched out like a green canvas, and I could already picture him building forts, playing catch, maybe even getting a dog once we settled in. "This is it, Dad. This is where we should live," Tommy announced with the certainty that only children possess. His excitement was infectious, and for the first time in months I felt hope creeping back into my chest. The neighbors we met during our walkthrough seemed genuinely friendly. Mrs. Patterson from next door brought us fresh lemonade and told us about the community barbecues every 4th of July. The Hendersons across the street mentioned their son was about Tommy's age and would love a new friend. Everyone we encountered had kind words and welcoming smiles. My military background had taught me to notice details, and everything I observed painted a picture of the ideal place to raise a child. The streets were safe, the houses well-maintained, and the sense of community felt authentic. After 15 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, I understood the value of structure and organization, and Willowbrook Estates seemed to have both in perfect balance. The HOA welcome packet arrived 3 days after we signed the papers. It was thick, professionally printed, and filled with rules and regulations that seemed reasonable enough at first glance. Grass height requirements, approved paint colors, guidelines for holiday decorations. Standard stuff that helped maintain property values and neighborhood aesthetics. "Some of these HOA folks can be pretty strict," mentioned Jim Henderson when I ran into him at the mailbox our first week. He said it with a casual laugh, but something in his eyes suggested there was more to the story. "Just keep your nose clean and you will be fine." I brushed off his warning as the typical complaints every homeowner has about bureaucracy. In the military, I had dealt with plenty of regulations and rule-following personalities. How hard could suburban life be compared to managing construction projects in combat zones? Tommy adapted to our new home faster than I could have imagined. Within days, he had mapped out every corner of our property, identified the best spots for future projects, and started making friends with kids throughout the neighborhood. His laughter filled rooms that had felt empty for too long, and watching him thrive made every sacrifice worth it. Our first month in Willowbrook Estates felt like a dream. Morning runs through the neighborhood, weekend trips to the local hardware store to plan home improvement projects, and Tommy's excited chatter about school starting soon. We were building something new together, something that felt stable and permanent after months of uncertainty and change. I remember thinking that we had finally found our place in the world. The perfect suburban community where Tommy could grow up safe and happy, where I could build a career as a freelance engineering consultant, and where we could both heal from the wounds of divorce and family breakdown. Looking back now, that innocence seems almost impossible to believe. But for those first few weeks, Willowbrook Estates truly felt like home. Corinne Steinberg introduced herself on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I was in the garage organizing tools when I heard the doorbell ring with an authoritative persistence that should have been my first warning. Tommy was in the backyard, bouncing a soccer ball against the fence while practicing his kicks. She stood on my doorstep like she owned it, clipboard in hand, and a smile that never reached her cold blue eyes. Corinne was probably in her early 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and clothes that screamed expensive suburb mom. Everything about her appearance was calculated to project authority and superiority. "Hello there. I am Corinne Steinberg, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association," she announced, extending a manicured hand that felt like shaking ice. "I wanted to personally welcome you to our community and make sure you understand how we maintain our standards here." Her tone was pleasant enough, but there was something underneath it that made my military instincts start paying attention. This was not a welcome visit. This was an inspection. "Thank you for stopping by," I replied, keeping my voice friendly and diplomatic. "Tommy and I are really happy to be here. Everyone has been so welcoming." Corinne's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, well, I do hope you will find our community guidelines helpful in maintaining the property values we have all worked so hard to preserve. I noticed your son playing with that ball earlier, and I wanted to make sure you are aware of our landscaping protection policies." Before I could respond, we both heard the sound of Tommy's ball hitting something harder than the fence. Through the backyard gate, I could see him looking worried, the ball sitting in the middle of Mrs. Patterson's flower bed where it had apparently bounced over the low border. "Oh no," Tommy called out, his voice carrying that particular mix of guilt and panic that every parent recognizes. "Dad, I think I messed up the flowers." Corinne's expression transformed instantly from fake pleasantness to something much darker. "Well, that settles it then. Destruction of landscaping is a serious violation of our community standards." I felt my jaw tighten but kept my voice level. It was an accident. 8-year-olds sometimes miss their target. I will go help him fix whatever damage was done and apologize to Mrs. Patterson. "The damage has already been done," Corinne replied, pulling out a form from her clipboard with practiced efficiency. "This is a formal notice of violation. The fine is $50, payable within 10 days. Future violations will result in increased penalties and potential legal action." The absurdity of the situation hit me like a physical blow. We were talking about a soccer ball that had disturbed some petunias, and this woman was treating it like a federal crime. Tommy had appeared at the gate, his face showing the confusion and fear of a child who knew he was in trouble, but did not understand why it was such a big deal. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this seems like a pretty minor issue that neighbors should be able to work out between themselves," I said, drawing on every ounce of military diplomacy training I possessed. Corinne's laugh was sharp and humorless. "That attitude is exactly the problem with single fathers. No respect for community standards or property values. This is precisely why we have rules and enforcement mechanisms." The comment about single fathers hit like a slap, but I maintained my composure. In the Army, I had dealt with plenty of difficult personalities and learned that rising to bait usually made situations worse. But something about Corinne's casual cruelty toward my family situation planted the first seed of real anger in my chest. "I understand the importance of community standards," I replied carefully. "Tommy and I want to be good neighbors. We will be more careful in the future." "See that you are," Corinne said, handing me the violation notice with an expression of smug satisfaction. "I will be keeping a close eye on this property to ensure compliance. We have worked too hard building this community to let it decline because of careless residents." After she left, I knelt down to Tommy's level and saw the worry in his eyes that would become all too familiar in the weeks ahead. "Am I in big trouble, Dad?" he asked quietly. "No, buddy, you are not in trouble at all. Sometimes adults make mistakes about what is important and what is not. We will be more careful, but you did nothing wrong. But as I watched Corinne walk back to her pristine house with that satisfied stride, I realized I had just met someone who viewed kindness as weakness and saw my family as a problem to be solved. The violation notices started arriving like clockwork. Every few days, another official-looking envelope would appear in my mailbox, each one documenting some new infraction that Corinne had discovered during her apparent full-time surveillance of our property. Day 12. Trash bins visible from street after 6 p.m. collection day. $50 fine. Day 18. Unauthorized chalk art on sidewalk. $75 fine. Day 23. Grass height exceeds 2.5-inch maximum by estimated quarter-inch. $100 fine. Each notice came with photographs taken from different angles, time stamps, and detailed measurements that showed Corinne was spending considerable effort documenting our every move. The chalk art violation particularly stung because it was from Tommy's attempt to create a hopscotch course for the neighborhood kids. Tommy began checking with me before going outside to play. "Dad, is it okay if I ride my bike? I do not want to break any rules." The anxiety in his 8-year-old voice broke something inside me every time I heard it. The pattern became clear after the first month. Corinne was not enforcing HOA rules equally across the neighborhood. The Hendersons' dog barked at all hours without consequence. Mrs. Chen had decorative garden flags that clearly violated the signage policy. The Martinez family regularly parked their work truck on the street, something explicitly forbidden in the HOA guidelines. But our property received microscopic scrutiny that bordered on harassment. Corinne would walk by at different times of day, sometimes stopping to take pictures, always with that same cold expression of someone hunting for violations. The legal fees started mounting when the HOA attorney sent letters threatening liens against our property for unpaid fines. Even though the violations were petty and inconsistently enforced, the legal language was intimidating and expensive to fight. My divorce had already strained my finances, and Corinne seemed to understand exactly how to apply financial pressure. Tommy's personality began changing in ways that scared me. The confident, outgoing boy who had been excited about our new adventure became cautious and withdrawn. He stopped inviting friends over after Corinne issued a violation for excessive noise during permitted quiet hours, when kids were playing in our backyard at 4 in the afternoon. "Why does that lady hate us, Dad?" Tommy asked one evening after another violation notice arrived. We were eating dinner, and I watched him push food around his plate without appetite. "Some people have been hurt in their lives and they take that hurt out on others," I tried to explain. "It is not about you or me. It is about something broken inside her." But my explanation felt hollow because I was struggling to understand it myself. During a neighborhood barbecue, I overheard Corinne talking to other HOA board members about certain types of residents who brought down property values. When she noticed me listening, her smile turned predatory. "Oh, Mike," she called out loud enough for others to hear, "I hope you have been receiving our communications about maintaining community standards. We just want everyone to succeed here." The public humiliation was deliberate and calculated. Other residents started avoiding eye contact when I walked by, as if Corinne's targeting of our family might be contagious. I tried reaching out to other board members, hoping to find reasonable voices who might help de-escalate the situation. But every conversation hit the same wall of bureaucratic doublespeak and deference to Corinne's authority. "She is very thorough about enforcement," said board member Dave Wilson with obvious discomfort. "Maybe just try to follow the guidelines more carefully." The guidelines are being selectively enforced, I replied, pulling out documentation of other violations throughout the neighborhood that were being ignored. Dave looked at my evidence but shook his head. I cannot get involved in disputes between residents and the HOA president. That is above my pay grade. Late one night, while researching HOA law and wondering how we had ended up in this nightmare, I discovered something that made Corinne's behavior suddenly make sense. In the public records of her previous neighborhood, I found a pattern of complaints and legal disputes involving a military family whose father had been deployed overseas. Corinne Steinberg had a history of targeting military families, and she had somehow identified me as her next victim. The random nature of her initial violations had not been random at all. She had been testing to see how we would respond, probing for weaknesses like a predator sizing up prey. That night, watching Tommy sleep fitfully in his new bedroom, I realized that diplomatic solutions were not going to work. Corinne was not interested in community standards or property values. She was interested in destruction, and she had chosen my family as her target. Tommy's 9th birthday was supposed to be our fresh start celebration. After months of Corinne's harassment, I wanted to give him one perfect day where he could just be a kid without worrying about rules or violations or mean adults who seemed to hate him for existing. We planned everything carefully. The party was scheduled for Saturday afternoon from 2 to 5, well within the HOA's permitted hours for gatherings. I sent invitations to Tommy's school friends and their parents, checked noise ordinances twice, and even called the HOA office to confirm we were following all guidelines. Tommy spent the morning decorating our backyard with streamers and balloons, his excitement building with each colorful addition. For the first time in months, I saw the carefree joy that had been slowly disappearing from his personality. "This is going to be the best birthday ever, Dad," he announced while hanging a banner between two trees. His smile was so bright it made my chest ache with love and determination to protect that happiness. The first guests arrived at exactly 2 o'clock. Soon our backyard was filled with children's laughter, the sound I had been missing for too long. Parents stood around chatting while kids played games, ate cake, and celebrated like children should be allowed to celebrate. At 3:15, I noticed Corinne standing at the edge of our property line with her phone pressed to her ear. Her expression was focused and predatory as she spoke to whoever was on the other end. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to convince myself she would not dare interfere with a child's birthday party. I was wrong. The first police car arrived at 3:30, followed quickly by 2 more patrol vehicles and a code enforcement truck. The flashing lights turned our celebration into a spectacle that drew neighbors out of their houses to watch the drama unfold. Officer Martinez approached me with obvious reluctance. "Sir, we received multiple noise complaints about this gathering. We need to document the situation and ensure you are in compliance with local ordinances." "Multiple complaints?" I asked, looking around at the children who had stopped playing to stare at the police cars with confusion and fear. "Officer, this is a children's birthday party. The music is not even loud enough to hear from the street." Behind him, Corinne stood on her front lawn with her arms crossed, that familiar smile of satisfaction spreading across her face as she watched my son's special day disintegrate into chaos. The code enforcement officer began taking measurements and photos, while parents started gathering their children to leave early. I watched Tommy's face crumble as his friends disappeared one by one, their parents clearly uncomfortable with the police presence and eager to avoid whatever drama had engulfed our family. "Dad, are we in trouble again?" Tommy asked, his voice small and scared as he tugged on my shirt. Before I could answer, Officer Martinez returned with his report. "Sir, there are no actual noise violations here, but we have to respond to all complaints. I would suggest keeping the volume down for the rest of your event." The damage was already done. By 4 o'clock, Tommy's birthday party had become a gathering of 3 remaining children whose parents were too polite to leave immediately. The cake sat mostly uneaten, the games abandoned, and my son stood in the middle of our decorated backyard looking utterly defeated. "Why does the mean lady hate us so much, Dad?" Tommy asked as we cleaned up the remnants of his ruined celebration. Tears streamed down his face as he threw away decorations that were supposed to make him happy. That question broke something fundamental inside me. I knelt down and pulled him into a hug, feeling his small body shake with sobs that no 9-year-old should have to cry. Over his shoulder, I could see Corinne still standing on her lawn, still smiling, still savoring the destruction she had caused. "I do not know why she hates us, buddy," I whispered into his hair, "but I promise you this, she will never hurt you like this again." That night, after Tommy finally fell asleep exhausted from crying, I sat in my home office staring at my computer screen. For months, I had tried to handle Corinne's harassment through proper channels, diplomatic conversations, and reasonable compromise. I had approached the situation like a military officer dealing with a difficult but ultimately manageable problem. But watching my son's innocence die at his own birthday party taught me something important. Corinne Steinberg was not a difficult person who needed managing. She was a predator who fed on the suffering of others, and diplomatic solutions would only encourage her to escalate. My military training had taught me how to gather intelligence, identify enemy weaknesses, and execute strategic operations. My engineering background had taught me how to analyze systems, find structural vulnerabilities, and solve complex problems. For the first time since Corinne had declared war on my family, I was ready to stop playing defense and start fighting back. The gentle father who believed in community and second chances died that afternoon along with my son's birthday party. What emerged from that death was something Corinne Steinberg had never encountered before. A man with nothing left to lose, and all the skills necessary to destroy her completely. The research began that same night while Tommy slept. I approached Corinne Steinberg like a military target that needed comprehensive analysis before engagement. Every successful operation starts with intelligence gathering, and I had 20 years of experience turning information into actionable strategy. The first breakthrough came within hours. Public records showed that Corinne had been HOA president for 7 years, but her reign had not been without controversy. Complaint after complaint appeared in city council meeting minutes, all following the same pattern of selective enforcement, harassment of specific residents, and abuse of power. The Martinez family had been forced to sell their home after accumulating thousands of dollars in fines for violations that other residents committed without consequence. The Johnsons had spent their retirement savings fighting legal battles over fence height requirements that Corinne had enforced only against their property. Each case revealed the same predatory behavior Tommy and I were experiencing. But the most damaging discovery came when I dug deeper into HOA financial records. As president, Corinne had approval authority for maintenance contracts and vendor selection. 3 companies that received regular HOA business were owned by her brother-in-law, creating a clear conflict of interest that bordered on embezzlement. Landscaping contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars over 7 years. Security services that other neighborhoods received for half the cost. Even the printing company that produced violation notices was charging premium rates for basic work. My engineering background made it easy to analyze the financial patterns. Karen was not just abusing power for personal satisfaction. She was stealing money from every homeowner in Willowbrook Estates to enrich her family. The documentation process became my evening routine. After putting Tommy to bed, I would spend hours building spreadsheets, cross-referencing public records, and creating a comprehensive picture of corruption that went far beyond petty harassment. But the investigation revealed something even more valuable than financial crimes. Karen had made enemies throughout the community, people who had been too intimidated or isolated to fight back effectively. I began reaching out to these previous victims, and their responses revealed the scope of her destruction. Linda Chen had been fined repeatedly for gardening violations that were actually attempts to grow vegetables for her disabled mother. "I wanted to fight back," she told me during a quiet phone conversation, "but I could not afford lawyers, and I was afraid she would make things worse." The Hendersons had been targeted when their teenage son started playing basketball in their driveway. She called it a noise violation and threatened to put a lien on our house, Jim Henderson explained with obvious bitterness. "We ended up taking down the basketball hoop just to make it stop." Each conversation revealed the same pattern of isolation and fear that Karen used to maintain control. She picked targets who seemed vulnerable or different, then systematically broke them down through bureaucratic torture until they either fled or submitted completely. But this time, she had chosen the wrong target. Tommy began noticing the change in our routine. "Dad, why are you always on the computer after dinner?" he asked one evening while I reviewed Karen's vendor contracts. "I am working on solving our problem with the mean lady," I explained carefully. "Sometimes when people are being unfair, you have to gather information before you can make things better." His face brightened with hope that broke my heart. "Are you going to make her stop being mean to us?" "Yes, buddy. I am going to make sure she never hurts anyone like this again." The strategic planning phase required military precision. Karen had multiple vulnerabilities that could be exploited simultaneously, creating a coordinated attack that would overwhelm her ability to respond effectively. Financial fraud charges would trigger criminal investigations. Discrimination patterns would create civil liability. Media exposure would destroy her reputation and social power. Most importantly, I identified other victims who were ready to fight back if they had leadership and support. The class action lawsuit began forming in my mind as I contacted families who had been driven from the neighborhood or crushed under Karen's systematic abuse. Margaret Stevens had lost her home to foreclosure after accumulating unpayable HOA fines. Robert Chen had suffered a heart attack during the stress of fighting Karen's harassment of his family. The Johnsons had used their retirement savings for legal bills that never resolved their persecution. Each victim represented both evidence of Karen's crimes and motivation for complete destruction of her power structure. Late one night, while reviewing the final pieces of my intelligence gathering, I realized that Karen had made a fatal tactical error. She had assumed that I would respond like her previous victims, either fleeing in defeat or submitting to her authority through exhaustion and financial pressure. Instead, she had given me months to study her methods, identify her weaknesses, and build a coalition of victims who were hungry for justice. Karen Steinberg had declared war on a military engineer who specialized in systematic problem-solving and coordinated operations. She was about to discover exactly what that meant. The attack began on a Monday morning with surgical precision. I had spent weeks coordinating multiple fronts simultaneously, and Corinne woke up that day with no idea that her world was about to collapse completely. At 9 a.m., the HOA received an official audit request from the State Attorney General's office. My documentation of financial irregularities had triggered an investigation into embezzlement and fraud that would freeze all HOA accounts and place Corinne's activities under criminal scrutiny. At 10 a.m., the first media van arrived at Willowbrook Estates. I had contacted investigative reporter Jessica Martinez with a complete package of evidence showing discrimination patterns, financial crimes, and systematic abuse of homeowners. Her story would air that evening on the 6 o'clock news with the headline HOA president accused of embezzlement and harassment campaign. At 11 a.m., Corinne received the first of 7 lawsuits that would be filed against her personally and the HOA board. The class action suit included 12 families who had been driven from the neighborhood, each with documented evidence of selective enforcement and financial damages. I watched from my home office window as Corinne emerged from her house to find reporters and cameras waiting on her perfectly manicured lawn. Her usual composure cracked instantly as microphones were thrust toward her face and questions about embezzlement and discrimination filled the morning air. Mrs. Steinberg, how do you respond to allegations that you have stolen over $200,000 from homeowner fees? Jessica Martinez asked with professional intensity. Corinne's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The woman who had terrorized my family with bureaucratic precision suddenly looked small and powerless when faced with real consequences for her actions. By noon, the HOA board members were abandoning Corinne like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Dave Wilson called me directly to distance himself from her leadership and apologize for not intervening earlier. I had no idea about the financial irregularities, he insisted, his voice shaking with obvious panic. The board was kept out of contract decisions. We just rubber-stamped whatever Corinne recommended. The afternoon brought criminal investigators who seized boxes of documents from Corinne's home office. Neighbors who had once feared her authority now stood on their lawns watching her humiliation with fascination and satisfaction. Tommy came home from school to find news vans lining our street and reporters interviewing neighbors about the HOA scandal at Willowbrook Estates. For the first time in months, he was not worried about breaking rules or causing violations. "Dad, is the mean lady in trouble now?" he asked, watching Corinne argue with police officers on her front lawn. "Yes, buddy. She is in very big trouble for all the mean things she did to families like ours." The media coverage that evening exceeded my expectations. Jessica Martinez had interviewed multiple victims, showing a pattern of abuse that stretched back years. The financial evidence was presented clearly, demonstrating how Corinne had enriched her family while terrorizing homeowners with petty enforcement actions. But the most damaging moment came when they played security footage from Tommy's birthday party. Corinne was clearly visible making phone calls to police, while children played quietly in our backyard, proving that her noise complaints were fabricated harassment rather than legitimate concerns. The public reaction was swift and brutal. Social media exploded with outrage about the Corinne from hell, who had destroyed children's birthday parties and driven families from their homes while stealing their money. The video of her calling police on 9-year-old Tommy went viral, making her the most hated person in our city overnight. Wednesday brought the first criminal charges. Corinne was arrested at her home on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and civil rights violations. The perp walk footage showed her being led away in handcuffs, while neighbors watched from behind their curtains. Her desperation became apparent when she tried to retaliate by filing more violation notices against my property. But her authority had evaporated completely, and the new interim board immediately dismissed all pending violations as harassment. The class action lawsuit expanded as more victims came forward with their stories. Families who had been too intimidated to fight Karen individually found courage in collective action. The financial damages were mounting towards 7 figures as lawyers documented years of systematic abuse. Karen's marriage collapsed under the pressure. Her husband filed for divorce and issued a public statement distancing himself from her actions. Her children changed their names on social media to avoid association with their mother's crimes. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove Karen from all positions and ban her from future involvement in community governance. New policies were implemented to prevent future abuse, including term limits, financial oversight, and appeals processes for violations. Property values throughout Willowbrook Estates had dropped due to negative publicity, but the overwhelming sentiment among residents was relief that Karen's reign of terror had finally ended. Tommy flourished as the stress disappeared from our daily lives. He started playing outside without fear, invited friends over again, and began talking about plans for his next birthday party. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week after the offensive began, I stood in my backyard watching Tommy practice soccer kicks against the fence. The ball bounced into Mrs. Patterson's flower bed, and instead of panic, he simply retrieved it and continued playing. Karen Steinberg's world had been completely destroyed through legal, financial, and social pressure applied simultaneously. But more importantly, my son was free to be a child again. The war was over, and justice had won. 6 months after Karen's arrest, the transformation of Willowbrook Estates was complete. The criminal trial had ended with her conviction on multiple felony charges including embezzlement, fraud, and civil rights violations. She received a 3-year prison sentence and was ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and individual victims. The financial recovery exceeded our wildest expectations. The class action lawsuit settlement provided compensation for legal fees, emotional distress, and punitive damages that totaled nearly $1 million distributed among affected families. My portion alone covered Tommy's college fund and allowed me to establish the freelance engineering consulting business I had always dreamed of running. But the monetary victory was nothing compared to the systemic changes that emerged from Karen's destruction. The new HOA board, elected by residents who had witnessed the dangers of unchecked authority, implemented comprehensive reforms that would prevent future abuse. Term limits ensured that no single person could accumulate Karen's level of power. Financial oversight required multiple signatures for any expenditure over $500. An independent appeals process gave homeowners protection against discriminatory enforcement. Most importantly, violation notices now required photographic evidence and witness verification to prevent fabricated harassment. The community healing process was remarkable to witness. Families who had been driven away by Karen's persecution began returning to the neighborhood. The Martinez family bought back their old house after the new board dismissed thousands of dollars in fraudulent fines. Linda Chen expanded her garden without fear of retaliation, and the Hendersons reinstalled their basketball hoop with full board approval. Tommy became an unexpected hero among the neighborhood children. His friends understood that he had somehow defeated the mean lady who had scared all their parents, and his courage in surviving her attacks earned him respect that money could not buy. Tommy is the bravest kid in our whole school, his best friend Jake announced during a backyard playdate. He faced down the scariest grown-up ever and won. The media attention brought unexpected opportunities. Jessica Martinez won a local Emmy for her investigative reporting on HOA abuse, and her follow-up stories about community recovery helped other neighborhoods identify and address similar problems. I was invited to speak at city council meetings about HOA reform and homeowner rights. Most rewarding was the flood of contact from other victims of HOA harassment across the country. My story became a template for fighting back against bureaucratic bullies, and I began consulting with families who were facing their own Karen Steinbergs. "Your documentation methods saved our family," wrote Patricia Williams from Phoenix. "We followed your research strategy and exposed our HOA president's corruption before she could destroy our home like she did to others." The consulting work evolved into a passion project that combined my military leadership experience with engineering problem-solving skills. Helping other families defeat their tormentors became more satisfying than any construction project I had ever managed. Tommy's recovery was the most beautiful part of our victory. The anxious, withdrawn child who had been afraid to play outside transformed back into the confident, joyful boy I remembered from before Karen entered our lives. His 9th birthday party had been ruined, but his 10th birthday celebration was epic. 40 children attended, along with their parents and grandparents who wanted to support the family that had stood up to tyranny. The party lasted from noon until sunset, with games, music, and laughter that filled our entire neighborhood with joy. Not a single violation notice appeared in our mailbox. Karen's house stood empty for months after her imprisonment, a constant reminder of what happens when power corrupts completely. Eventually, it sold to a young couple with twin toddlers who brought new energy to our street. The irony was not lost on anyone that Karen's perfect lawn was now decorated with children's toys and sidewalk chalk art. The personal growth that emerged from our ordeal surprised me. Fighting Karen had required me to become more strategic, more patient, and more ruthless than I had ever imagined possible. But it also taught me that protecting innocence sometimes requires destroying evil, and that justice delayed is often justice denied. Tommy learned lessons that no classroom could teach. He discovered that bullies can be defeated when good people work together. He saw that standing up for what is right sometimes requires courage that feels impossible to find. Most importantly, he learned that his father would move mountains to protect him from anyone who tried to cause him harm. Our relationship deepened through shared adversity in ways that good times alone could never have achieved. We had faced down a monster together and emerged stronger, closer, and more confident in our ability to handle whatever challenges life might bring. The neighborhood barbecues resumed with genuine warmth instead of fearful compliance. Children played freely without worrying about invisible rules or cruel adults who might punish them for existing. Property values recovered and exceeded their previous levels as word spread about our transformed community. On quiet evenings, I sometimes stood in our backyard watching Tommy practice soccer or build forts with his friends, and I marveled at how completely our world had changed. The scared father who had tried to appease an unreasonable tyrant had evolved into someone who understood that some battles must be fought regardless of the cost. Karen Steinberg had intended to destroy my family through systematic harassment and abuse of power. Instead, she had given us the opportunity to discover our own strength, build lasting friendships with fellow survivors, and create positive change that would protect future generations. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from avoiding conflict, but from refusing to surrender when evil people try to crush innocent dreams. Tommy's laughter, echoing through our neighborhood every evening, was the sweetest sound of victory I could imagine.